Me, Marcus Fenix? The one who fought at Aspho Fields?
Yep.
Wow, cool!
Not really.
The Battle of Aspho Fields was a crucial event that would end the 79-year-long Pendulum Wars between the Coalition of Ordered Governments and the Union of Independent Republics. 3 years before Emergence Day, a secret meeting was held within the House of the Sovereigns in Ephyra, led by the highest COG command. Among the people that were invited to this meeting was General Hoffman. Hoffman realized that something big had shifted in the course of the war when he walked into the briefing rooms at headquarters, as he felt out of place and was given no information, and he also saw that he was seriously outranked. It was a small gathering, but in terms of sheer authority, it was a summit. Along with Hoffman was Captain Michelson of the D Flotilla, the COG's Amphibious Assault and Special Maritime Operations, as well as the Orbital Technology Division. The meeting began as COG Chairman Thomas Dalliel displayed a map showing the coastal plain of the Austrian Republic, an independent state with a lukewarm alliance with its much bigger and more aggressive neighbor, Pelés. Dalliel pointed out a specific feature on the map called Aspho Point. Agent Setile, who was also in the meeting, went into detail of the wetlands around Aspho Point, which were originally drained for farming a few centuries ago, which is now used as an isolated research facility which has been developing weapons guidance systems and avionics for the UIR for 20 to 30 years. However, something changed. Intelligence shows that routine avionics work has been farmed out a chunk at a time to other places, and Aspho Point has been turned over to a single project. It is now developing a satellite weapons platform, which has been given the codename Hammer of Dawn. Chairman Dalliel then explained that the UIR could be ready to deploy within a year, while the COG satellite platforms are still sitting in computer modeling systems. Dalliel closed out the meeting by telling everyone to start a plan for taking Aspho Point, seizing the technology, and neutralizing the facility, personnel included, which needs to be carried out within the next 6 months. And so, the plan to seize Aspho Point would commence, which would also be labeled as Operation Leveler. Hoffman was ordered to lead a small commando force and Pasanga's volunteer team into Aspho Point by beachhead raid and capture key scientists that could create the hammer technology. The remaining scientists were to be killed. Among his group was Dominic Santiago. The plan was now set. COG and Navy forces are to create a diversion in Berifus City in hopes of keeping UIR forces' attention on them while Hoffman and his team steal the Hammer of Dawn data. C Company of the 26th Royal Infantry was tasked with cutting off all reinforcements to Aspho Point. The leader of this group was Major Helena Stroud, Anya Stroud's mother. Among her group was Marcus Fenix and Carlos Santiago, Dom Santiago's older brother. After completing their training at the Marinat Naval Base, the C Company was transported to Fesser Naval Base to board the CNV Pomeroy, and Operation Leveler would begin. Hoffman and his team were now en route to Aspho Point. The Sea Raven deployed the troops into the water on Marlins, the inflatable hovercraft used by COG commandos for fast, stealthy amphibious insertions into enemy territory. Huddled in the Marlin with Dom were Hoffman, Baytak, and 8 other Pasangas, with the rest of the troops being in a second Raven. The Pasangas were a Saran ethnicity from the country of Pisang. They were natural commandos that joined the COG's efforts against the UIR during the Pendulum Wars. However, unlike most COG-aligned states, Pisang retained its freedom as an independent country. As such, Pisang was considered an ally to the coalition rather than a membered state. They beached the Marlins in an inlet, unloading the explosives, and fired up the 3 bot machines, which were Frank, Bruce, and Joe. These bots were tasked with downloading all of the Hammer of Dawn data from the servers. The team located the junction box on site and had one of the bots cut the power to the comms tower. Aspho Point was now silenced and the raid had just bought extra time. The team was now in the building and the raid would begin. The team would break into 3 groups. Hoffman and a mix of COG commandos and Pasangas would be Red Troop, while Dom led his group of COG commandos known as Green Troop, and the third being Blue Troop, which were COG commandos led by Shelt Morgan. Hoffman was to sweep the accommodations area with Red Troop and to extract the 3 key scientists, Mirig, Ivo, and Beatrice. Dom and Green Troop were to clear a path in for the bots from the front, and Morgan and Blue Troop to go in from the back and start laying charges, and Benjafield and Cho to hold and keep an eye out for enemies. As Hoffman moved up the corridor with Red Troop, they cleared all rooms that were open and made their way to the bedrooms. As per the intel layout, there were double doors with a simple deadbolt. With their tactical rifle lights fully on, they hauled 11 of the Aspho staff from their beds and herded them into the common room. The Pasangas lined them up face down on the floor as Hoffman ordered them to speak their names. As Hoffman went down the line, he identified 2 of the 3 key scientists, which were Morris Ivo and Colin Beatrice, which were then both handcuffed. Hoffman then asked where Mirig was. A girl said to Hoffman that she wasn't there and that they would never find her. She then identified herself as Mirig's daughter, which gave Hoffman leverage. Hoffman ordered the troops to take the 2 scientists and the girl to the Marlins and to cut the rest loose when they are ready to exfiltrate. Meanwhile, Dom and Green Troop had Frankbot open the keypad lock to the main building. As Dom entered the lobby, he was confronted by a security guard with his sidearm drawn. Before Dom even had time to shoot, Shim Kor, a Basenga troop, took out the guard with his machete. The group advanced to find the room with the servers. As Dom bursted into one of the rooms, he saw a young woman watching TV with headphones on. She was watching the live coverage of the diversionary attack on Baraphus. Dom stepped in front of her with his lancer in her face and asked her who she was and what her job was. The girl claimed that she was a network tech. Timyu, a COG command that was also in the room with Dom, tried to convince the girl that this was part of a security exercise which seemed to have calmed her down. She then explained that they have only 2 guards on duty and the security is low since they have a backup of the Hammer of Dawn off-site which is protected by Ossig Corps. When Dom contacted Control, Agent Setile answered and said that Ossig Corps was the acronym for the army base just north of them. Hoffman joined the comms and confirmed that they have 2 of the 3 scientists and that Blue Troop was laying charges. He then asked Captain Michelson to prepare the patrol fighter jets to level the base. As Frankbot hovered around the banks of servers and continued to download data, Dom did one more sweep of the upper floors with the Basengas. He was expecting to be ambushed at any moment and they still hadn't found the second guard if he was on the premise at all. Benjafield then relayed to everyone on comms that there was a contact just offshore, 6 or 8 men running parallel with the shore 100 meters out. Meanwhile, C Company was spread out along the south bank of the main channel to block any advance. Carlos Santiago had his eye on the bridge and the road leading to it. As he continued to look out for enemies, he saw movement which was then picked up by infrared which caught 3 or 4 moving heads, then vanished. Carlos cupped his hand over his headset mouthpiece and informed the squads of 4 or more personnel on foot 1,000 meters out. Another voice came over the comms which was Sergeant Kennan saying that there was a second contact 1,500 meters out and was an APV or light armored vehicle. Marcus was already loaded and waiting with a missile launcher nestled on his shoulder. The squad began hearing the distant rattle of automatic fire going off and the battle for Aspho Point had kicked off. Marcus was locked onto the lead APV. The squad was now under heavy fire from multiple contacts approaching from Parasva. Major Helena Stroud then ordered the squad to return fire. The hostiles were also now advancing onto the Aspho Point building. Dom checked on the server room, but Frankbot was still downloading data. Hoffman ordered Dom to get the civvies into the lobby to be brought down to shore with them as they exfiltrate and would be cut loose at the last moment. As Dom began to move the civvies, he heard movement on the roof. Morgan's voice was heard over the radio saying that one person was making his way onto the roof. His radio went silent and there was a rattle of fire from inside the building. Voices suddenly burst onto the circuit and said that there were 2 hostiles right outside and the one on the roof has been taken out. There were still 3 Indies unaccounted for, which Dom listened for indicators from the flat roof above. The Indie soldiers then burst through the window, swinging from the roof. Dom and Timmu emptied their clips on the Indies, making sure that they were dead. Dom relayed to comms that 3 hostiles were down and that they were making their way out. The team was now in trouble as more Indie troops were advancing the building. Dom went back to the server room to check on Frankbot's progress. The Indies were also increasingly advancing on C Company with armored fighting vehicles. Marcus had a long spear rocket launcher balanced on his right shoulder as he pointed out to the group that the only way they can make it with heavy vehicles is across the bridge. C Company was now split into 2 across a maze of channels, mudflats, and reed beds as the Austrian mortars churned the ground between them. On the flat terrain, there was no vantage point to observe from, limited cover for movement except for the small scattered islands of woodland, and a steady stream of fire was pinning everyone down. Carlos then spotted enemies setting up mobile anti-air weapons 2 clicks north. When he relayed this information to Major Stroud, she notified Control that the patrol jets would encounter surface-to-air missiles and that they would take them out. She then requested Ravens for CASEVAC. Mortar strikes continued raining on C Company with the accuracy improving. Marcus then aimed a long spear rocket launcher and fired it on a mortar position. The missile arced across the levels and dropped into the grass to end its flight in a ball of flame. The squad was burning through their long spear ammunition very quickly as more light armor vehicles were advancing. C Company's part of the operation had shifted from being a defensive wall for the raid to being a fight for their own survival. Another mortar exploded to Carlos's left and would kill Sergeant Kennan. Major Stroud then requested air support as there were 10 armored vehicles approaching Aspho Point. Bernie Mataki, who was a platoon commander with C Company, radioed Major Stroud that she is seeing intermittent line of sight signals from the facility to Parasva and that Hoffman needs to be alerted that he has company. Major Stroud then radioed Hoffman that there were hostiles on site at the rear of the building. She then appointed Mataki as senior NCO and ordered her to regroup with Kennan's platoon and take out the enemy's light armor vehicles. Ty Caliso joined comms to inform the squads that he heard Indy choppers approaching from the sea. Marcus adjusted position to reach for another long spear, which he only had 2 left. The squad now had more targets than missiles. Carlos told Marcus that they need to move across the channel and drop grenades into some of the vehicles. They were still standing off on the maximum range of the long spears and had separated far enough for him to have to track across with his Lancer scope to follow them. Carlos now heard Chimera assault helicopters approaching. They were either coming out to wipe C Company or they were heading to Aspho Point. Taking one of these down with a long spear was no easy task. Meanwhile, at Aspho Point, there was a hostile inside relaying the squad's strengths and movements. Hoffman went to search for this individual himself and ordered Baytak to take out the 2 that were on the shore. The second security guard was somewhere on the roof and somehow knew where the gears were located in the building. There would now be a backup squad on the way if it already wasn't in position to pick up what the first Indy squad didn't finish. Baytak, Shim, and 4 of the other Pasangas drew their machetes again and disappeared into the tall grass, quietly taking out both hostiles. Hoffman then ordered them to stay near the boats and to watch for helicopters. The bots were about 10 minutes away from finishing their job with the data. Hoffman slid back into the main building through the double doors, stepping over the non-essential Aspho staff sitting on the lobby floor. Morgan and the Pasanga troop were still trading fire with the 2 Indies at the rear of the building. Dom had joined them, but Hoffman caught his arm and made him follow. Morgan relayed to Hoffman that the Indies shooting weren't moving and that it was part of a diversion and that there would be a second wave coming. Hoffman ran back up the stairs with Dom to find the second security guard that was signaling the Indies from the roof. Ludovic Young, a COG commando, was checking on Brucepot's progress while Hoffman had his attention on the ceiling and fire doors, looking for a route to the roof. Brucepot completed the data download while Jobot was just finishing. Hoffman had Young bring Brucepot out to Benjafield. When Dom and Hoffman reached the top of a single flight of narrow stairs, they found a small door with a lock on it. Dom shot the lock off with his Lancer and bursted through. The beam from his tactical lamp picked up a man in a security guard uniform on a pile of crates to reach an open vent right at the top of the wall. He froze while looking at their direction with his pistol. He managed one more signal with the lamp, then both Dom and Hoffman opened fire. After checking the body for any useful documents, they planned to activate the detonators and get out of the building. Meanwhile, with the C Company, 2 patrol fighter jets were now inbound toward Aspho and Parasva from the northeast to take out the Indies. However, one of the jets was hit mid-air by an enemy anti-air tank. There were 2 enemy ASPs that needed to be taken out. Major Stroud ordered Marcus to take out the first ASP on the left and had Byron Yakovs, a COG soldier, take out the second one, as well as the anti-air piece that was nearest to him. He only had 2 long spears left, so it needed to count. Marcus fired a long spear at the moving ASP, however the missile went wide by half a meter. Carlos grabbed the last missile and loaded it for Marcus as the ASP was moving out of range. On the other side, Yakovs wasn't having much luck either. The ASPs knew the gear's limits, however he was able to hit one of the light armored vehicles. As Marcus fired the last long spear, an APC cut across the line of fire and caught the incoming missile fully broadside. Any other time this kill would have raised a cheer, but all it represented now was Marcus' last long spear was wasted. Anya Stroud's voice came over the comms and said that more patrols were to be scrambled, but it's going to be 10 to 15 minutes and that Hoffman and his squad are ready to exfil. Major Stroud expressed her frustration as they were now left with no ground to air support and they were down to just RPGs. She paused for a minute and her voice changed completely. She said to Anya over comms that she was doing fine and that she was proud of her. This silenced everyone. Stroud never broke radio procedure comms with personal chat. It was clear that she was thinking that she wasn't coming out of this fight alive. Carlos couldn't bear it and cut in and said that he can take out one of the ASPs if he gets closer. Marcus also said that he would do it as well. Major Stroud told them both to go right and lay down some fire and keep as many of them busy as possible. Carlos heard her breathing through the comms as well as her boots thudding into the wet soil. He then heard a man's voice say one word but did not understand it, then saw Stroud take a leap onto the hull of the ASP and drop something inside. The Indy soldier on top cover dropped back inside rather than trying to scramble out. She didn't manage to slam the hatch shut and was hanging off the ASP, caught with both boots off the ground. The gun turret swung over as it had seconds to live. Stroud struggled to reach for her knife to cut the straps, but it was too late. The massive explosion blew the ASP apart, flames shooting into the night sky. Major Helena Stroud was now dead. Mataki was now in charge of the squad, and there was still one more ASP to take care of. Carlos can now hear chimeras circling in the air. They had to be waiting for Hoffman's party to exfiltrate. As Hoffman herded the Aspho staff across the soggy turf, he saw the chimeras tracking up and down, waiting to pin them down during the exfil. Hoffman yelled at the staff to run away from the building before it blew. Morgan and Young came racing out of the entrance with the bots. Hoffman and his squad were now running for the boats. The bots were now at a 60% charge, but Hoffman was also worried that the chimeras would destroy them while attacking the boats and thus failing the mission. So he asked Michelson to send out a Raven to retrieve them. He sent the bots out on their own to a hover point 2 clicks offshore to be picked up. Ivo was in Benjafield's Marlin, bound and gagged, and Beatrice and Mirig's daughter were in Cho's just in case only one boat made it. The boats had room for some civvies, so Dom grabbed 6 passengers. The boats were now roaring away from the shore, and Aspho Point had been blown up. The sound of the chimera became extremely loud as it was now right above the boats. Benjafield pushed the throttle as far forward as he could and tried to steer clear. The light from the chimera beamed on the Marlin, and Hoffman started shooting at it with his Lancer. The second chimera locked onto Cho's Marlin. The gunfire hit the water in the space between the 2 boats, but then was successful in hitting Cho's Marlin, causing an explosion. Dom, Hoffman, and Tim Yu all unloaded their clips into the nearest chimera, causing it to fall back. They then saw it circling the water and getting lower, then belly flopped onto the sea. They saw the side hatch open, so they continued to open fire, hoping to hit the crew. The second chimera broke off the attack and hovered above the stricken one. Dom dropped his Lancer, kicked off his boots, and jumped into the water to save Cho. Carlos began to worry about Dom as he saw one of the helicopters out to sea with a fierce beam of light playing beneath it. Marcus told him that there was nothing that he could do and to focus on taking out the ASP as they were still waiting for the Petrel air support. As Mataki asked control of the status of the Petrels, her voice paused suddenly as a fresh wave of mortar fire started on her position. Control then relayed that all 6 remaining Petrels were launched and encountered an Austri squadron off the coast and were engaging. The ASP was now on the move again and heading back onto the road. Carlos scoped through and spotted it moving. It was making its way back to the concrete road across Aspho Fields that linked to Aspho Point. The squad speculated that it had been called back up to whatever was going on offshore. Carlos was now eager to rush the ASP, but Marcus and Mataki stopped him before doing so. Yakov and a fellow cog soldier, Marison, assembled an assortment of rounds that they had left, which were a stomper and a few gut punchers. Gut punchers were an anti-vehicle grenade launcher attachment for Lancers. It was less effective than missiles, but did a good job at close range. Marcus then relayed to Mataki that they're going to engage the ASP before it gets to the bridge. As the ASP made its way onto the roadway, Carlos scrambled into the grass to cover fire for both sides. Yakov's and another cog soldier, Hernan, went to the left side, while Marcus and Marison went right. As the ASP got closer, both sides opened fire with the gun punchers, causing a hole punching clean through the side plating. The ASP swerved and ended up 1 track off the road surface. However, the driver survived and corrected course towards the bridge. Carlos sprang up instinctively and ran for the bridge to try to put another gut punch in the ASP. He then realized that he just made a huge mistake. While Marcus yelled for him to get back, Yakovs and Hernan ran to get Carlos but were met with gunfire. Hernan fell hard to the concrete while Yakovs was still standing and tried to grab Carlos but was then hit 3 more times. Both Yakovs and Hernan were now dead. Carlos felt something hit him so hard in the top of the leg that he lost his balance. He fell down, toppling into the shallow, muddy water. He was still alive but severely wounded. Marcus managed to take over the ASP. He backed it up and swung it around to face Aspho Fields again. Carlos watched as Marcus drove the ASP into Austri lines. Carlos folded his arms on the bridge to support his weight. He could feel a raw, oddly distant pain from his hips to his knees. When he looked down to see where he'd been hit, he realized that it was far worse than he originally thought as he saw his own guts. He was just observing, but he had to move. He was about to heave himself out of the channel when the explosion started. By the time he dragged himself onto dry ground and found his legs weren't working, Aspho Fields was in turmoil as Marcus charged deep into Austri territory, striking light armored vehicles and firing on troops. Carlos now laying panting on the bridge and unable to move. He managed to press his radio to let Mataki know that he was going to stay put for a while and to keep an eye on Marcus. Meanwhile offshore, less than a kilometer from Aspho Point, Dom was in the water tending to the marlin that had been hit. Morgan was bobbing face down on the waves. Young slumped over the gunwale, and Cho desperately trying to bail out. Two of the scientists were struggling and screaming as they wouldn't be able to swim once the Marlin went down since they were handcuffed. Dom started using his fighting knife to cut the plastic ties on the civilians that were on board. Some of the civilians and the Pisang troops were already dead, riddled with rounds that had ripped through the Marlin's hull. Beatrice was face down in water that was flooding in, and Murig's daughter was struggling to keep her head above it. Dom hauled them both into a sitting position, but it was too late for Beatrice. Benjafield then drove the other Marlin next to Dom to start moving civilians over to it. Dom now had the terrible choice of who he could save and not save, since the other Marlin had little room to spare, and Hoffman ordered that all of his troops were to be saved first. Morgan and Young were slid over to safety. Dom needed to act fast as the Chimera could come back at any moment and gun them all down. Baytak shouted from the water to take the civilians instead of himself. Dom hauled whoever was still afloat on the Marlin and placed their hands on the hull. Hoffman then grabbed Dom by the collar to pull him to safety. He was barely able to hold onto Hoffman's outstretched arm as he had no strength left in his grip. Baytak then shoved him, which made him land into the Marlin head first. As Dom positioned himself in the Marlin, the Chimera made its way back and opened fire. Malcolm Benjafield, standing at the wheel of the Marlin a meter from Dom, was hit in the chest and face and thrown into sea. Dom felt rounds punch through the hull. All he could do was fire back with his Lancer. Timmu and one of the Pisangas joined him in firing as well. Suddenly, something whooshed overhead, trailing a small wake of smoke and flame, and hit the helicopter in the tail section. The Chimera was now destroyed and the debris fell into the water. Baytak and Young would not survive. With the squad being confused about where the missile came from, Control relayed that Marcus had commandeered an Indy vehicle with anti-air and has been shooting everything in sight. A rescue Raven has now arrived, hovering over the water to pick up the crew. Dom successfully drove the Marlin into the Raven's cargo bay. The mission was officially successful. Marcus's ASP came to a halt after being hit 3 times by Indy light armor. The patrol jets had just hit Parasva and were coming back for a second run. Marcus opened the hatch and ran back to look for Carlos. Mataki ordered Tai Kaliso to get the stragglers down to the Sea Raven while she retrieved Marcus and Carlos. The battle had wind down, however, there were still many Indy troops around that were firing. Mataki sprinted to Carlos and took cover as automatic fire ripped up the ground a few meters from her. As she asked Carlos if he could make his way back to the rally point, he said that he couldn't move. Marcus was now closer to the bridge than Mataki. She ordered him to stay back, but he refused. Mataki darted along the edge of the channel, zigzagging and dropping flat every few meters. Marcus was moving along the opposite bank. He got within 100 meters of the bridge, but the fire became too heavy and he was pinned down. Mataki then took a few seconds to check where Carlos was. The sight of him made her stomach lurch. Carlos was ripped apart, lying on his side on the bridge with one arm extended as if trying to get up, with the other hand clutching his guts. The pool of blood spread around him. Carlos pleaded for Marcus and Mataki to leave him there. Marcus began running towards the bridge again as rounds were lifting the wet soil around him. An Indy soldier nearby heard Carlos and started shooting at him. Carlos said to Marcus to take care of Dom and that he was his brother too. Marcus told him to stop talking like that and he would be able to take care of Dom himself when he returns. This was the first time Mataki heard Marcus come close to breaking down. He was always so detached, but he was human. Carlos was his best friend, his brother. Carlos was now hit in the chest, but he was able to move his arm to his belt to take out a grenade. He yelled at Marcus to shoot him as he was having trouble pulling the pin. Marcus froze. Mataki knew he couldn't do it. He would never be able to recover from shooting his best friend. Mataki sighted up her sniper rifle, settling the reticule of her optics on Carlos's forehead to put him out of his misery. Marcus cut back on the radio and told Carlos that they were coming to get him out and started running towards him. But Carlos refused to allow Marcus to die trying to get to him. And at last, Carlos pulled the pin. The debris hit Mataki, concrete, mud, and the bridge collapsed. Marcus just bellowed. Pure anger and grief. Not even a word. Marcus was now kneeling on the shoreline with his best friend's remains wrapped in a bivvy sheet, waiting for the Raven to pick them up. All of the squads were now back home, as well as the bots with the Hammer of Dawn data. Operation Leveler was now complete. Hoffman, Carlos, Major Stroud, Dom, and Marcus were all rewarded with the Embry Star, which is the highest military award for heroism. 3 years after Operation Leveler, the COGS version of the Hammer of Dawn was completed and would be used to take down 4 UIR naval ships, which sparked a phone call between Chairman Dalyell and UIR Premier Yuri Dushenko. Dalyell then told Dushenko to surrender or face destruction. The UIR then agreed to enter peace talks. Carlos's death had a profound emotional impact on both Marcus and Dom, which shaped their relationships throughout the series. Dom did not find out the details of his death until years later, as Marcus kept the disturbing details from him in order to protect him, keeping Carlos's promise. Brothers to the end.